go, here we 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 go. Hello and welcome to Containers from the Couch. I am Justin Garrison, and with me today is Matt Williams from Infra HQ. How's it going, Matt?
Hello, it's going well. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. It's been a little while since I've been on the show. I'm excited to start again.
It's been forever since I've been here.
Right, this is your first. This is awesome. For anyone that was at KubeCon last week, KubeCon in Detroit, North America, feel free to say hi in the chat. I was there in person for a couple days. AWS had a lot of people there, so I'd love to see what you learned. If you saw any good sessions or learned about new tools, let us know in the chats. But today's show is all about secure access to clusters. I met Matt, it was like 6 months ago, 8 months ago.
Yeah. About that when I first started at Infra, and we just happened to join a chat on one of our Slacks that we're both on.
Right. It just so happened like, hey, we're both around. And then we started talking about what you did. And I was really interested because getting access to Kubernetes clusters is something that a lot of companies and people are just trying to figure out. You know, sharing kubeconfig files doesn't scale as well as some people might think.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear like about what is Infra HQ, what is the Infra commands, what problems are you solving?
Okay, cool. So yeah, I joined Infra about 7 or 8 months ago when we spoke on that in that impromptu Zoom room, and I had just at that point I had just left Datadog, and I'd been with Datadog for about 8 years, so. You know, I started when they were 40 people. Now they're, I don't know, 4,000 or so. And, you know, went through the IPO and all that stuff. And it was, what an incredible ride. So I joined Infra to help them with, you know, all the things that I helped Datadog with. And we're still young, still a very young company. We're at 9 people so far, mostly in Toronto. But really scattered all over the place. In fact, last week, I was hoping that we'd be able to go to KubeCon, but didn't work out. And so we all ended up meeting together in Toronto at you know where the two founders are, and those two founders, you know, when I first spoke to them, I wasn't, you know, they kept reaching out to me, and I was like. I'll put off that call until, and eventually they got through to me and said, "Oh yeah, we, you know, we're building this company, and before this, we had actually built another company called Kitematic." It's like, "Oh, Kitematic! Oh my God, Kitematic! I loved Kitematic. Kitematic was incredible for making Docker really easy to use on the desktop." And so to think that, you know, these two guys that built Kitematic are now building this other thing around Kubernetes access, and it was like the perfect time to have that conversation, because I was having a very similar problem at Datadog, just, you know, getting access to different Kubernetes clusters and other types of infrastructure, and it's like, I need your tool now. So the promise of Infra, I totally believed in right away. And I mean, I still do. It's incredible. You know, if I think of, it's not only about giving access to Kubernetes clusters, it's also about, you know, revoking access. So I mentioned the company I was at before. I can neither confirm nor deny that I might still have access to certain resources that company owns 8 months after I left. And so, you know, this is one of those problems that exists. You know, how do you revoke access?
Yeah, the life cycle of access management and people, because people leave companies, people switch teams, people need various levels of access throughout their careers, and a lot of
a lot of times it's, not only, hey, I need to do my job, but now it's like, oh, actually, I don't need that anymore. And how do you audit those
Yeah.
things? How do you make sure that the right people have the right access at the right time?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you transition from one group or department at a company to another group, you might have had super duper access to one cluster before, and now you get access to something new. Has that access to the other one been revoked now that you're in this other group and no longer need it, and probably shouldn't have that access? But giving access and revoking that access is kind of hard, especially on Kubernetes, but also on other platforms. Even I guess it's maybe a little bit easier on on AWS and IAM, but still it's a challenge, especially if this is not something you do every day all the time.
And those layers of access matter too, where let's say,
Yeah.
I write an application, I need admin access in the application. Like that's all application logic. I can store, like my admin credentials and, however we get access to the application itself. Below that, you're looking at infrastructure layers, and you're looking at either Kubernetes access, which can be controlled through RBAC, can be controlled through IAM, can be controlled through other proxies like Infra. And those sorts of levels it's just another level of like, okay, do I need access here or do I need it in the application? And even below that, there's, if you're on-prem, you have switch access, right? Like I could log into a switch and do different things that I could do if I could log into a server. And so being able to audit those different layers and being able to control the lifecycle, it's hard. It's a hard problem to say who has access to what at what time is not something that's easy to solve. And with Kubernetes, it's typically, here's a kubeconfig file with a certificate, and maybe you have the right RBAC setup. But if not, it's just like, okay, well, here's admin. Everyone gets admin because that's the easy thing. And hopefully no one copied that file.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That is the challenge. I mean, you've got this file that you've generated, because creating those certificates is kind of a pain. There's plenty of tutorials online that show you here's how to create the certificate and sign the certificate. But most of those tutorials talk about, okay, now SSH into the control plane to grab the CA to download to your machine and then use that to sign the certificate. If you've got some sort of managed Kubernetes, EKS or DigitalOcean or Civo or any of these things, they're not letting you SSH into the control plane to download that CA. And so that tutorial, you're stuck at that point. And there are definitely tools to make creating those certificates a little bit easier. One of the founding members of the founding, I guess, team members for Kubernetes, who was moved on to be corporate vice president at Microsoft, Brendan Burns? Brendan?
Yep.
Yeah. He's got a great script out there that will generate the certificate and then generate the kubeconfig file. But even then, that's okay. Now you got this kubeconfig file with a certificate that guarantees you access to your cluster, and you got to share it somehow. How do you share that file? And then, if you share that file, now that person whoever has this file has access to that cluster forever. And how do you revoke that? How do you generate new certificates? And if you do, well, then you got to share that file again over and over and over again.
Even like audit logs, right? Like if everyone has the same certificate, you don't know. You have to look at IP
who's
addresses.
Doing what.
Yeah, where did this IP address? Who had this IP at this time? Maybe I can figure out who it was. It's like, no, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to secure a cluster.
Yeah.
So
that's what.
How is Infra different? What is Infra doing that makes it easier or better?
So as an end user, or I guess end users aren't really logging into Kubernetes, but as a developer who's trying to get access, or an ops guy who's trying to get access to that Kubernetes cluster, all they have to do is run one command, one CLI command, Infra. They run Infra login, and then what server are they logging into? And then once you do that, now all the tools that you use with Kubernetes just work, accessing whatever clusters that you should have access to. So if you want to use kube control, great, use that. Or if you want to use Lens, great, use that. Or you want to use any Kubernetes tool, as long as it uses that kubeconfig file, which is everything, then it has access to just the clusters and just the namespaces that you're supposed to have access to. And it's kind of like magic. And for now, it's just Kubernetes. The goal is to expand that to other things within your infrastructure, like SSH and maybe Postgres and AWS and Google and all the other infrastructure things. But for now, it's Kubernetes, and it does it really, really well. So do you want to do a demo?
Yeah, let's look at it.
All right.
So on your screen here.
Awesome. Okay, so right now I've started off. I guess we don't need to see my search bar or whatever on the other side. I can't figure out how to get rid of it. Anyway, so we're looking at a GitHub repo. This is github.com/infrahq/infra. And that is our open source repo for the whole project. This has there's when you think about infra, there are two main pieces. There is a server, and that server is kind of the authoritative source of who are all the people in your organization, what are the groups, what is the infrastructure that they have access to. All of that lives in the server, and a lot of that data is living in a Postgres database on that server. And then there are connectors, and you'll install one server for the entire everything for all users. You'll have one server, and then you install multiple connectors, one connector for each Kubernetes cluster. And so if you just want to have access to that one Kubernetes cluster, well, you can install on that server the server as well as the connector. Or then, of course, we got a SaaS option. And that SaaS option is not fully available yet, but I'll be doing a little bit of a demo from it. That SaaS option, basically, we take care of the server, and you just install the connectors on all your Kubernetes clusters. And so it's really easy to get started with. Here's the repo, but if I go into the documentation, that's at infrahq.com/docs, infrahq.com/docs.
Can you blow
we have the full, yes. So I'm going to go, a lot of this documentation talks about how to use the SaaS version, but down under reference, there is self-hosted infra. And that explains, here's everything you need to do to install the server on your own cluster and not use our SaaS version. But let's jump ahead and see what it looks like when we get everything installed. So I'm going to go into here. Now here I've logged into, this is matt.infrahq.com. And Matt is just the organization I've created to manage all my things for me. And I see 4 clusters that I have access to. I created all of these last night in preparation for this. And so I created a EKS cluster on AWS. I created another cluster on Civo. I created another cluster on DigitalOcean, and I created another cluster on Oracle Cloud. And then I connected my clusters. So once I've got either the SaaS version or the server that I've installed myself, all I have to do to add these other clusters is connect cluster. In fact, maybe I should do that with my Docker desktop. So I have one called Docker ddesk. Okay, and so here's the command I need to run. So I'm going to copy this command. So I've already got the repo installed. I don't really need that. So I'll go into my too many things open. And let's see, I want to set my context to Docker desktop. Okay, so now I'm definitely looking at Docker desktop, and I can add I'm going to do one other thing. Because I'm using Docker desktop, I need to add this one extra key, which is, what is it? Set connector config skip TLS verify. That's just because I've got this Docker desktop with self-signed certificates. Normally you wouldn't do this. And so now that's all I have to do to add a new connector. And pretty soon we should see, yep, cluster connected, and I see my Docker desktop added. So now that I've got these different clusters added to my environment, I want to give people access to it. And so we can do that with users. I've got a bunch of test users. And in a real environment, I'd probably actually not create users myself, but rather connect them to a provider. And so we can connect to Azure Active Directory or Google stuff, or Okta, or just any generic OpenID provider. And really, all of these things are asking for the same bits of information. Okta needs a client ID and a secret and a domain. Same thing with OpenID, same thing with Google. On the back end, they're all a little bit different, but generally it's the same set of information that we need to get this connected. I'm not going to do it here, but I'm just going to go back to my my users.
In that case, like I set up my provider, and user management is typically done by someone else, right? There's going to be another team or someone that's like, oh yeah, we're the Okta team, we're the access team, so they can manage all that, and then they can give users that already exist, because they're already managing, new account creation, account deletion, or suspension, whatever, and say, okay, now there's a new category in that provider that says, oh, you need access to all Kubernetes. I'm sure they could break it up however they want. All Kubernetes clusters, individual clusters.
And that person that manages all those users in Okta, they don't know anything about clusters. What clusters do people need? I don't know. I just know that Justin just started as a dev in group 123. And so I've added Justin, I've added him group 123. And I, as the administrator that knows about these Kubernetes clusters, knows that anybody who's in group 123 needs to have access to my AWS cluster. And not just access, but a specific kind of access. So let's go ahead and add, I'm going to add you. So I'm going to add
a new dev. This works.
Justin.
Remote onboarding right here.
Linux.com with the ultra cool email address. Okay. And so now an email has been sent to you with a link inviting you to join matt.infra.com. Fingers crossed, that's all going to work. And while you're doing that, well, actually, have you received any sort of email yet?
I did. I need to set a password.
You've set that stuff. I'm going to add you to a group. I called it group 123. So I'll create group 123. And I'm going to add Matt, and Matt Techno-Evangelist to that group. And I'm also going to add Justin at linux.com to that group. How you doing on setting up your access or your
password, and I logged in.
Okay, cool. So at the moment, Justin doesn't have access to anything. All he's a user within Infra, and that's it. But I want to come over to... I can see
clusters. I can see basically the same connected clusters, but yeah, I don't...
Sure.
I can't do anything.
But you probably don't have access to anything there. So what I want to do is, for this AWS cluster that I created, I want to grant group 123, I want to grant it access. Cluster admin, I don't know. Justin's kind of... I'm not really sure about Justin. So I'm not going to give him cluster admin. In fact, do I want to give him any access to the entire cluster? I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I actually want to come down to my namespaces and just add them to the default namespace. So I'll add group 123 here. And admin, he's a bit sketchy. So I'm going to add view access only to group 123. And now, if you go to your command prompt, do you want to switch over to your? Yep. We'll see if this works.
Let's see. Okay, so there's my view of what's available.
So switch over to the terminal and do an infra space login space matt.infra infrahq.com.
That's the domain that is hosting this,
Yep.
right?
Yep. I'm crossing my fingers that this is going to work.
There we go.
Okay, so now, how would you normally set the context? Do you use like the context plugin for crew, or
I keep separate files.
Okay, well, just if you were going to use kubeconfig, what's in your kube? I mean,
I think it's alias to dev null.
Okay. Well, that might be an issue.
Oh no, it's there. Okay.
Okay. So I guess maybe there's only one context in there. If you're not using it, we just
I typically do not. Yeah.
Okay. So there's nothing in there. How about type infra use or infra list? Sorry. Okay. So you have access. You can view. Try infra use AWS-mat-2.default. Yeah.
That's cluster name based on the I don't know if you call it a provider or an instance, whatever the server is.
Yeah. So
based on that, I have a cluster and a namespace.
Yes. And the cluster is what I chose to call that within infra. Okay, so now if you just get pods.
There you go.
Yeah. So you are looking at my server or at my AWS cluster. You're not looking at my Docker desktop, because then we'd have to do some sort of tunneling to get access to my machine.
Right. So, well, and explain the steps here, because this is like magic, right? Like I don't have access to your AWS account. I don't have a user there. You just sent me an email, and now I can see your Kubernetes cluster. Where is this path connecting? If I do something like, I guess I want to see the curl commands coming through of like where does this go? Like I connect to, here we go. Here's the AWS API, the EKS API that I connected to. But what is actually in my, what did I get in my kubeconfig file based on this access?
Yeah, so there is is there anything actually now in your kubeconfig file? There should be something there. Okay, so we've got, there is a bunch of stuff here. So that's the thing that's that, and there's how is this actually? I don't know enough of the details of how this is actually working, other than it's magic.
But I'm curious, because I'm connecting my access now. I have a certificate that gives me access directly to the EKS API. The EKS API typically is going to be gated by IAM. I need some IAM privileges to be able to access that cluster. And so at what level is what I'm trying to figure out. Like, does Infra create an IAM user inside of EKS? Is Infra being a proxy
Infra
to say...
Infra doesn't know anything about AWS or where. It just knows about what is the certificate. It generates a certificate in your cluster, or in my cluster, sorry. It generates that certificate, and it gives that certificate the access it needs to it assigns the roles, it assigns everything, so that is a valid user or valid certificate within my cluster. And it just, by running that infra use command, we're just copying those that certificate into your kubeconfig file. And that certificate, every time you run not just the infra command, but any of the kube control commands, because it's accessing that kubeconfig file, and because that kubeconfig file is referencing mat.infra.hq.com, it is updating that certificate every 5 minutes or so. And so we are always sure that you really do have access. The longest that you might have access after we revoke it is 30 seconds or so.
Right. So in that
all
case,
of that, yeah.
My certificate authority, like if I do show Context. Current. All right, I don't need to show there. Config current context. Oh, but there's another option for that. Because I use separate files, I don't typically list out the I know there's actually a plugin for to view. There it is. View and then this whole thing. Let's see if it shows me the whole thing. Oh. I'm trying to remember. Well, I'm trying to remember some of these commands now for context. I'll figure out. But yeah, I'm trying to think where am I connecting to? So I see my calls go directly to the API server, obviously in EKS.
Right. Right. But it would have made that call at the.
But somewhere in here
On.
Except there's my client.
Yep.
And that's just a DNS lookup. And then I do my get. And there's my default pods limit 500.
Right.
And that's the same thing I'm getting here, but I have accept user agent. Didn't I see I thought I saw a certificate, but I guess it's being sent automatically. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out.
There's on the back end, we are doing that communication from the connector to the server, validating, is this user who's just logged in with this particular token that's in your kubeconfig file, is that person really able to access this cluster? And we're just verifying, yep, okay, and here's the rights that this user has, or based on the role, that role has been assigned to that certificate.
And at that point, I have this connector running. I'm assuming makes. Can I do config maps? Infra connector. Okay, so this will show me. Here's my access key. There's the URL. Yep. Secrets. So there are secrets. I'm forbidden because I don't have access to that.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I'm just trying to dissect it now and figure out where exactly, where does this go? How is this working? So I see my access key file, but at some point, the certificate that is put in here, this is basically a proxy back to Infra HQ and saying, hey, this connector gives a direct tunnel access from Infra as a provider, the server backend, into this connector, into the cluster. And that's how you can get it across multiple, wherever the cloud, that's on your desktop, because your desktop connector makes an outbound connection because you don't have a port open. You don't have anything that's letting Infra HQ in. You have to go connect back out to it. And then your connector is doing that heartbeat or whatever to say, hey, I'm still here. Here's my information. Here's my secrets. And so at that point, what's a that's I'm just trying to figure out.
There are no users.
Yeah, no. At what point does the connector make more resources inside the Kubernetes cluster, or more resources inside of EK or AWS in general?
So it's creating the certificate that is creating the certificate that is matched up to you as a user within Infra. It's generating that cert and signing and all that type of stuff.
Right.
And then assigning the role. In this case, it's the role that's called view. It's assigning that role to it's doing that role binding of view to the certificate that is for you. And the groups are just something, a concept on our side. Is an easy way to assign
inheritance and everything else from any sort of OIDC provider. You're going to get that sort of like, hey, here's a tree of stuff I need, and people lower in the stack need that access as well. It makes it so much easier than trying to manage it otherwise. And someone did ask about, I think you showed this already, but ADDS, Active Directory.
Active Directory. Active Directory services. I know.
Yeah.
What's there's like an extra D in there. Is it AD?
Yeah.
Active Directory? So yes, yeah, actually Azure Active Directory we do support
Okay.
it's an OpenID connector, OpenID OIDC connector. And so we will work with that. One thing that's going to be coming pretty soon is support for SCIM. So it's not just just-in-time user creation, but rather we're getting, as soon as you add a new user to AD or Okta or any of these other things, it'll just it'll show up right away within Infra.
Okay. And I did see here
That's
in the docs
okay.
a process flow for here's the domain, here's the
Oh.
Matt Infra HQ. I'm connecting to this Infra connector via proxy, which is proxying the Kubernetes API. And so because I have the connector inside my cluster, it makes that outbound connection. So whenever I'm making connections, I go through this proxy to get to the Kubernetes API, which is where my certificates are valid. And that's where my access is considered valid. So like you mentioned, once you revoke my access to the cluster, I'm going through your proxy, and the proxy will do that cache lookup every time. So I don't need to re-sign certs. I can keep my kubeconfig file and it'll just be invalid. That's just that file doesn't matter anymore because I'm always connecting through the proxy in order to get to the Kubernetes API.
Yeah, exactly. I drew that diagram, and yet, and yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So yeah, well, so now at this point, you don't have access. I've revoked group 123 from having access to the cluster.
Are you sure?
And so what happens?
Yep, forbidden.
Oh, forbidden.
I lost it. Thanks a lot, man. I guess I got fired. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And so
it's a scary moment. I can't log into Kubernetes anymore. Is Kubernetes down or am I down?
Right. Yeah. So I mean that is if I can have super quickly remove what I ended up doing was remove the group, remove access for the group, but I could have kept the group having access to it, but just remove you from the group or moved you to a different group, and then you would automatically adopted the roles that you were moved, for the group that you've been moved to.
At that point, I'm assuming I'm forbidden because I'm trying to connect to the API. If you change teams for me, I'm in a different group. I need to I'm assuming log in again to refresh that, or does the certificate stay valid? And
let's give it a shot. So we'll make group 123. We'll give it view access, and then I'm going to create another group. I'll just use dev, and I'll add Justin at Linux to dev. And did I add? Okay, Justin, you're in group 123, and you're in dev. And if I go into AWS and default, group 123 has view access. Oh wait, I've added you to both groups. That's stupid. So let's remove you from dev. Okay, so now on AWS Matt default, group 123 has view, but dev has admin. Okay, so do something that there was a command you ran that, okay, that's a good way of looking at it. So you're in group 123. If I
still take one cluster and I see that I have view access.
Oh yeah, let's go to infrastructure, and I know you work for AWS, but we'll give you access to this cluster on Civo as well, and we'll do that by adding the dev group as a admin to the whole cluster, as well as on this Oracle Cloud, and they're an admin, and add. Okay, so dev has access to all those things, but you're still in group 123.
Right.
So if I remove you from group 123 and add you to dev,
Yep.
Justin. Oh, Justin. And now you do that again.
Okay.
So you're, and if the
And-
list, you see access
see
to all those things.
So I have access to them through the proxy.
Yeah.
How do I now? My context is still set to this AWS Mat 2
Yep.
cluster. So I can.
So if you had some, if you can, how would you normally set the context? You can set it through the kube control. I always use CTX with the context plugin for crew, but
I think I have it installed.
Okay, great.
So, and I have my three other.
So choose one of them, and now get the nodes. You'll see they're all Oracle related.
Oh, because I don't have access. Oh, did you have access to the?
I didn't give you a cluster admin.
Right. Okay.
That's you're on the Oracle one, right?
Yes.
So we'll change that to cluster admin. Okay, now you should try it. It might take a second. Try Infra use.
I got it.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
So it takes a few seconds to come up.
All right. It took me a couple retries on that, but I can see this is a Oracle Linux server, and it's definitely not an EKS machine anymore.
Right. Right.
That's fascinating. I didn't know they used Cryo. I'm so used to seeing Containerd everywhere. I was like, oh, Cryo.
Right. Right.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm trying to think of is this backend here. So kubectx, I can see the other clusters I have access to, but they are not in my. I don't believe they're in my kubeconfig file, are they?
Take a look now. They are now.
Okay. Yeah. So does Infra do a refresh on that, or
the Infra command? The Infra command will add those contexts and clusters to your kubeconfig file. And now, if you do Infra log out, take a look at your kubeconfig file. Those should be all
so they're
gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the other question is, I typically dev null my kubeconfig file, and I manage individual files inside of my .kube folder and export a kubeconfig environment variable.
What a pain in the ass that is.
So I have a wrapper that I wrote actually for kube control that lets me on the fly switch my contexts.
Right. Okay.
So that's why I like to keep them separate. Also, because when I was managing dozens of clusters, switching context is a pain because I can't have one context in one terminal and the other context in another terminal. And I was frequently checking different clusters, verifying things across clusters. And so I would have multiple clusters set in individual terminal windows. And that's how I like to manage it. And changing that at the file level doesn't let you do that. And so I wrote my own wrapper. That's what I was to be able to do that. And also things like EKS control and Terraform can spit out to individual files. And so I don't ever have to worry about like, oh, am I in the wrong cluster?
Okay.
I always verify my environment variable.
So I don't know if we're able to, I mean, I know today we write to that kubeconfig file. I don't know if we can specify which config file to use. And maybe use a different kubeconfig file.
Would it actually? Let's see.
Oh yeah,
it happens.
You need Infra login mat dot infrahq.com.
Yes. So it honors the kubeconfig environment variable. So I would have to give. So it assumes that it can always write to this file. I'm guessing. So that it's going to say like, yeah, we can verify that we can change your context, and now my CTX will only have those
Right.
files, but I could in a separate window export my environment variable,
Yeah.
and an Infra can update that new file, and it would just keep throwing those in there. I do have to manage, because I'm guessing I can't split these out one at a time, but that's really interesting that it's
Yeah.
using that kubeconfig file as its way to automatically add and remove clusters I have access to.
Right. And that way you can use whatever tools you like. I mean, we Infra, between Kitematic and Infra, there was actually infra.app, which is an IDE for accessing all your clusters, much like Lens. But you could use Lens, or you could use Infra app, or you could use K9S, or any of the tools that you would normally use with Kubernetes, all just work with Infra.
Yeah. I do know some people use things like Vault to store, like you actually don't have a kubeconfig file. It's stored in Vault,
Right.
and you can fetch it, because there are different backends for where your kubeconfig comes from. Do you know if Infra supports those as well?
Idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Because that's another thing that, like, I know a lot of people, they just don't want files. There's like, get rid of the files. We want secure access, and they're managing access to the kubeconfig file via can you log into Vaults, and Vault stores those secrets for you. So
yeah, I don't know. I would imagine it would be, I mean, sure, I'll get the developers build that right now.
The client Go library is supposed to abstract a lot of that away from anyone that's developing on top of that. So like when I was building a Kubernetes plugin, a kube control plugin, I imported client Go, and I didn't have to worry about, is this on-prem, is this Docker desktop, is this Azure, is this EKS? Like it just manage how access gets provided to those clusters, and authentication transparently. So client Go is really powerful there. But I know more and more people are just trying to get away from these file management, because it's hard to manage 50 files for 50 clusters.
Right. And for now, we're just trying to make that part easy, where, okay, you've got this kubeconfig file. Let's make it really easy for anybody without installing anything, you have to install the Infra app, but or not Infra app, the Infra CLI.
Command line,
And then all that stuff is taken care of. And that Infra CLI is available for Windows and Linux and Mac.
That's cool.
And so that's a little bit about Infra. And actually, there's also a full API, although the API docs are not available at the moment. We're hosting the API docs with a provider, and they changed some things about how they provide it, and there is an API. It's all in the GitHub repo. But I was playing around with the API just a few days ago, and one of the things I created was a Slack bot, so that I could say, create a new incident in Slack, and because I use that term, it would ask me, okay, which users should be in the incident. I would give a list of email addresses, and instantly all those users were promoted to having cluster admin for that particular cluster. So that was really cool.
Interesting. Yeah, so you can create groups based on an event and say, hey, this is temporary access, and we could just give that. Is that I'm assuming Infra, or at some level, like there's auditing that takes place, like I could go and review who made those commands, because you have the proxy, so you have all that information of who's making connections from where, when. Yeah,
so that the access logs are not available yet, but that is definitely something that is, in specific thing that is actively being worked on to, there's a lot of things that, you might say on a call like this, and say, oh yeah, our developers are working on it. No, they really are. And that's one of the core features that's going to be in the product. Another thing I played around with pretty recently was just using the API to go into create, use the Zapier platform. So to create the integrations for Zapier, and use that to then create Zaps that would look at a Google Docs spreadsheet that says, every time this user gets added to the spreadsheet, automatically add them to Infra and add them to the right groups based on what's listed in the Google spreadsheet or Airtable or Salesforce or whatever your user management or anything that works with Zapier will work with Infra because of creating that. I haven't made that public yet. That was
Yeah.
something I just built out last week. But there's if you're not using OIDC or any of the OIDC providers, well, you could still use however you like to manage users, whether it's Airtable or any of the things.
Every company has their
Just
own
that's
system and
right.
their own automation and backend, and pretty much
Yeah.
most of them come down to a spreadsheet at some point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did see someone actually mention earlier about Terraform. Do you know if there's a Terraform provider to be able to manage my users with that API?
I don't know if there is a Terraform provider. I know that we internally use Terraform to deploy our production version of Infra, as well as the Infra SaaS version. I know we do use that. I don't know if we have a provider for
Right.
Terraform yet.
Yeah, but I
know
could see
that-
that being a great use case of here's my cluster. Oh yeah, also I need to create these users in Infra based on that cluster access. So I can export, whatever it is I need in Terraform, create the cluster, install the connector, and now create users that can access that cluster.
Right. So if we actually go back to the demo on my side.
Yep.
I'll just show you which directory am I in. Let's go to demo. I've got one file in here that is demo values. It's a Helm values file. And so if we do that, really all that's in here is, if I create maybe I'm not using the SaaS version. I'm not using mat.infrahq.com. I just create a server on my local cluster somewhere. When we do that, well, we need to provide some initial information of like, how do you log in? And so for that initial login, I've got, matt@example.com and a password of password. Normally, we wouldn't put a password in plain text in the values file. You'd provide a secret and then refer to that secret. And then matt@example.com is being given the role admin for the resource Infra. And so we could create under users, create all the users in this YAML file, and then bring those users in, and then the grants, all we change for, say, Matt, or what was it, AWS-Matt-2, we'd have user Justin@linux.com, role view resource Matt or AWS-Matt-2 : default.
With the cluster.
Yeah. And so and you could do that for all your users there. Maybe you are generating, you've got some other command line thing that generates all these usernames or spits out all these usernames into a YAML file. You could just bring that in. So, and if you can I guess you can call Helm from Terraform. I don't know. Can you call it? Do you call Helm from Terraform?
There is a Helm provider for Terraform. So yeah, you can tell Terraform which repo, which package, and then which values to put in that package. So yeah, you can create the cluster. It'll wait for the cluster to create or API to be available, and Terraform can put that into the cluster with Helm. Cool.
Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes.
Awesome. Well, this is really cool. I think that's, solving some problems for people that are just like, hey, we got started with Kubernetes. We have these files everywhere. Now we don't know how to manage the lifecycle. We don't know who's accessing it. We don't know how to audit it. And at this layer of infrastructure, those things are really important. So I think it's really cool. I think that's the model scales pretty well of hey, you can run a server. You could have a server inside of a management cluster, which is a typical pattern for a lot of people. And you have these connectors and all the other application clusters, team clusters, whatever it is, however you're managing that, and then giving them access from the centralized point is pretty cool.
Yeah. So, and I mean, you saw how quick it was to revoke access or add access, and pretty quickly you lost that access, and then you gained additional access.
I switched teams. I've went through a whole life cycle of a new career. It was amazing.
Yeah. So we're pretty excited about that. We're still pretty new. We've been around for, I think they were Y Combinator winter 2021. So pretty new company. But yeah, we're going strong.
Yeah, awesome. So anyone in chat that wants to check it out, it's open source. You can go run it yourself, and
Yep.
I think it's something fun to play with and another way to get authentication. So Matt, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on the
Sure.
show and showing us. And
Yeah.
one more question that I just saw jump in: is there? I
Oh
know
yeah.
you mentioned this as. Is there a pricing model?
There is not a pricing model yet.
Right. So for
I know
now,
that is definitely one of those questions I want an answer to. You know, I think back to when I was at Datadog, and we were looking at platforms like Airtable, and you know, there was one person in the evangelistic group that really wanted Airtable. I really wanted Coda. The reason why we went with Airtable was Airtable was charging, and Coda wasn't yet at that time. So
Mm.
I know the importance of having that pricing model in place.
Is there a place that
The
people can get involved to follow up on that? If they say like, oh, is there
Yeah,
a Slack or a Discord that
yeah.
people
So
can?
there now we don't have a public Slack yet, but we do have you know, the GitHub repo and issues on the Git. I mean, we use GitHub a lot, and so uh, that might be a good place. You can also ask questions to we're Infra HQ on Twitter, or I'm Techno Evangelist on Twitter, as shown in right there.
Yep.
Um, and uh, um, and there's the self-hosted. You know, that's going to
Right.
be, you know, you'll be able to
Run it
self-host forever.
yourself. You're responsible for it, but
Yeah,
also all it
yeah.
costs is your time.
And it is, I mean, even with self-hosted, I mean, you can be, there's basically one command. You need to set up the Helm repo and update your Helm repo, and then it's a one-liner. And if you're using on Docker desktop, then adding that skip TLS verify. But if you're on a real cluster somewhere, it's that one line, and now you've got the server. You're good to go.
Oh,
it's pretty easy.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Matt. Thanks everyone
Yeah.
for watching. And I know Containers from the Couch, we have another show tomorrow. So stay tuned. It's all about batch on EKS. So if you're interested, batch workloads. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Jobs and anything that you want to throw in a cluster that runs temporarily, pretty much. So
Cool.
excited. That just launched for us at EKS last year or last week
Okay.
at KubeCon.
Okay.
So we're having a stream on it. So anyone interested,
Cool.
check it out tomorrow, and I'll see y'all later.
All right. Thanks so much.